Welcome to this video where I'm going to be walking you through how to make my husband's great-grandmother's mustard pickle recipe. This is a special family recipe that has been handed down for generations. And when we did our pantry tour of showing all of the food that we preserve and grow from home, this was by far the most requested recipe that you guys wanted to learn how to do. So I am super excited to get to share this recipe with you. And if you want to get all of my canning recipes and tutorials, how to can everything from your fruit to soups to meats to broths, then you need to go and check out my Home Canning with Confidence e-course. This is just a small snippet of the things that you will learn and get all of the recipes that we use to can well over 400 jars here every single year on our homestead. You can find the link below to go see all that is included inside the Home Canning with Confidence e-course. And now let's go out to the garden and get our ingredients to start this recipe. Welcome to the garden. So what we're going to need to begin with for this recipe, the two main ingredients are we're going to need some onions as well as some cucumbers. But you can't do this with all pickling recipes, but this is one that you can do it with. If you don't have enough cucumbers on, you can swap out and use zucchini in a lot of pickling recipes. And because it's kind of a chunky mustard sauce, it's more of a condiment. It's not really where you're going to pick out the cucumbers or the pickle in there and just eat it like you would like a garlic dill or regular pickles. It's not really a relish either. It's kind of a cross between the two. So zucchini lend themselves really well to this recipe if you don't happen to have enough cucumbers. And we have had, believe it or not, you guys, at the time of this recording, it is mid-August. We have had 4 straight days of rain, and even by Pacific Northwest standards, it's been really unseasonably cool and wet here, which means that my cucumbers aren't producing as prolifically as they normally would. We really need some good summer heat. So because I'm a little bit short on my cucumbers just due to the weather, I'm going to be using zucchini in this recipe. And I love a recipe that gives me a little bit of versatility. Now, with a lot of canning recipes, you can't swap ingredients in and out unless you know that those are tested ingredients that say it's okay to swap this in for this and that you aren't going to be altering or changing the pH value at all, especially when it comes to pickling and water bath recipes. Okay, let's go grab our onions and zucchini. Okay guys, we're back in the house. Time to get this produce rinsed and chopped up. So when you're using onions straight from the garden, as long as you plan on using them right away, then it's awesome because you don't have to worry about curing them. So Grandma's recipe takes a little bit of prep time, but not nearly as much as prep time as some of the other pickling recipes that have you soaking your cucumbers for overnight or up to 24 hours. So we are going to be leaving the skins on the zucchini and we're going to be dicing them up. I need 6 cups of either zucchini or cucumbers and 2 cups of onion. Now, when you get to the larger part of the zucchini where you have got the seeds in the center, we don't actually want that part. We want the more firmer outside edges that don't have seeds. So when you kind of get to the center part where those start to become, you kind of just want to chop around the outside. And then the center parts, I usually just put in the compost pile or feed to the chickens. And if they get to the really big part where the seed part goes all the way out and there's just this little skinny part, these ones I'll see if I need it, but I think I have enough zucchini that I can save these for something else just to make the prep work faster. Up next, 2 cups of onion. So up next, we need to get the onions and the zucchini in a salt ice water bath. So we're gonna put all of these in a big, I just use a big old stainless steel bowl. Glass bowl is totally fine, but you need one big enough that you can submerge all of this beneath your cold water line. So we have all of our prepped veggies for this recipe are in here, and then you're gonna take half a cup of canning salt, and we're just gonna sprinkle this all over the top. Up next, we are going to use some ice cubes. So just a tray of ice cubes here. And this is just gonna simply help keep the water really cold. And on top of this, we are going to add in the coldest tap water that you've got. We're on our own private well. And after this, I'm gonna run the water so that the well can get down to some of that cooler water. And as soon as that's nice and chilled, then we're going to top this off. And then you can kind of just mix this around. The salt's pretty much just gonna dissolve in with the water and the ice. But now we wanna make sure that this stays submerged down in that nice cold water. So I just take a dinner plate and set that here in the bowl and then kind of press down, and that's gonna act as a weight to keep our veggies beneath the surface and in this cold water. We're gonna let it soak for 1 hour. And the reason that we let these soak for an hour is the salt and the cold water help to draw out extra moisture that are present in the vegetables so that we get a crisper pickle on the other end. Okay guys, so it has been an hour. It is now time to get these bad boys rinsed and drained and get this going on the stove. You do want to make sure that you give these a really good rinse, otherwise it can be overly salty in the finished product. So don't be afraid to let these hang out in the rinse water for a while. And sometimes I'll even just take like a little chunk here and taste it to see how salty it is. And that wasn't too salty, so I think these are pretty much rinsed sufficiently. So we're gonna go ahead and let these drain out in the sink here while we go and prep everything else. So while we are getting our prep ready, you do want to have whatever you're using for your water bath canner heated and ready to go. So I'm actually using my pressure canner as my water bath canner. Instead of using the lid of the pressure canner, I'm just using a cookie sheet. I don't actually have a pot lid that's big enough to go over this. So I've just got this on warm so that the water is starting to heat up. It's about medium heat. So it's beginning to get warm, but we've got some cook time for our mustard pickle relish. So I'm not quite ready to turn this up to get it close to a boil yet, but I don't want it to be super cold. So about medium heat to get that warming up. And then we have got our pot over here, and I'm gonna go ahead and put this on my back burner, and we're gonna get our first set of ingredients into this. Okay, so first we're gonna be putting in our dry ingredients and then we're gonna add our wet. So first up is 6 tablespoons of ground mustard. I have 4 tablespoons of sugar, 2 teaspoons of celery salt. You can use regular salt, but Great Grandma's recipe calls for celery salt and it just adds an extra flavor dimension. So I highly recommend using the celery salt. And then we also have 2 tablespoons of turmeric. And you definitely want to be wearing an apron for this part because you can imagine with the turmeric and the ground mustard, you're going to get a pretty bright, bold yellow color, which looks amazing in the jars and tastes great, but it also is very easy to stain clothes. So I'm a messy cook. I always try to have an apron on in the kitchen. Now, the last ingredient that we're going to be adding in, this one is optional, but we're going to talk a little bit of canning safety here. So in the original recipe, it called for flour, but flour and cornstarch are no longer considered updated and safe ingredients to use in your home canning. So if you used to can pie filling or do some different relishes like this that called for those ingredients, don't use them any longer. The problem is they don't stand up always to the heat long term. So oftentimes your pie filling or different products, after it's been sitting on the shelf for some months, it'll start to break down and turn watery and weepy, which kind of ruins the texture. And that was the whole point we were putting a thickener in to begin with. But the most important reason is it can create hot spots using flour and cornstarch and any other type of thickener. So arrowroot or tapioca starch, any of those. We don't want to use those for canning because they can create uneven thick spots inside the jar in the food, and it can create uneven thick spots where the extra thick part is too thick for the heat to evenly penetrate and get through enough to kill any of the bacteria that we need to be killed in order for that food to be safe and to be on the shelf and not grow any of that. So you don't want to use it. So the option is to don't use any thickener. Or the only approved thickener for canning is to use a product called Clear Gel. What it is modified cornstarch. Now, it doesn't mean it's GMO, and in the video description below, actually will provide you a link to the non-GMO version that I use, but you want to make sure it's the one for canning. So I'll put a link in there below. So if you don't have that and you want to make this, same thing with your pie fillings, omit the thickener or get your hands on some of this. It is actually, I really do enjoy using it. But if you don't have it, omit it out, do the recipe, and then at the time of eating, especially with pie filling, then you can use whatever thickener you normally would with that recipe. I really like to use this with the relish though, because I'm putting this, I'm not cooking it after I'm done with it. I'm putting it straight into salads or onto sandwiches, that type of thing, hot dogs, hamburgers, and I don't want it to be watery. I want it to spread on and have that thickness. So that's why we use this. So you're gonna be adding 2 tablespoons, I buy mine in bulk, of this to the rest of your dry ingredients. So we have all of those here in our pot, and I'm gonna go ahead and kind of whisk these dry ingredients together a little bit. And this is without any heat on. Now we're going to add a 1/2 cup of water. And then we're gonna whisk these up with that 1/2 cup of water. So you're gonna see it's kind of making like a slurry paste here. So just get that all incorporated. Okay, so now we are gonna be adding in our 4 cups of vinegar and we're gonna stir that together. And then we're gonna turn on our heat. I'm gonna do this on medium-high because I need to bring this to a full boil. And if you're newer to canning or you have some of those older recipes and you didn't realize some of those practices were considered outdated and not safe anymore, I have a full home canning with confidence e-course, which this recipe is part of, where I walk you through how to know if recipes are safe, what are updated procedures and tested things, the way that you should be doing things to make sure that your food is safe, along with all of my favorite recipes that we make every year to stock our pantry. And you can find more about that full course to get access to all of those at melissanorris.com/home canning with confidence. And I'll have a link below and I'll make sure it pops up in this video for you as well. Because I think it's super important that we preserve not only these traditions of preserving food using things like home canning, but that we also are preserving those old family recipes, but doing so in a way that they're food safe for us. I have to say some of my most treasured recipes are those just like this one that come both from my side of the family, and this one is actually from my husband's great grandma, and I have used those steps to update them to make sure that we're following all of those guidelines without losing these precious recipes and memories. So once it begins to reach a full boil here, you're just gonna keep stirring this until it begins to thicken up. So you're gonna get it to a full boil and then bring it back to a simmer. So I'm gonna turn my heat back down to medium, towards the medium-low side, and keep stirring this, and you will feel it begin to thicken up. Okay guys, so after about 5 minutes, you will see that this mixture has started to thicken up. And at that point, we wanna go ahead and fold in all of our prepared onions and cucumbers. So I'm just gonna bring this forward enough so that I'm not hitting my microwave and fan that's above the stove here. And we're gonna work these in. So we're just gonna fold this into our sauce. Make sure those are all covered. And now we need to bring this back up to a full boil. So I'm gonna increase my heat just a little bit. Let this get to a full boil, and then we're just gonna put it to simmer while we are getting our jars ready. So we really only need to get this so that the cucumbers and the onions are heated all the way through, so it can just simmer for about 5 minutes. Okay guys, so I have got my jars hot and in a bowl of super hot water here to keep them warm. And we're gonna go ahead and begin to get these filled up. So first off, I need to remove my makeshift lid to my canner. And we're gonna go ahead and turn the heat on this all the way up. So here I've got my hot jars, and we're gonna be doing pints for this recipe. Funnel. And then when I've got quite a bit of solids, like at the top of this jar, I've got quite a bit of solids that are going on here, then I'm gonna take a little bit more of a liquid scoop to start to top this off to a 1/2 inch headspace. So now we're gonna go ahead and check this headspace, transfer that. Little handy dandy tool here. So I'm pretty close, but I do need to remove air bubbles, so we're gonna go ahead and do that. Get our air bubbles removed, which usually means it'll lower the headspace with the removal of those air bubbles. And that usually means we need to top it off a little bit more. So I just make sure I'm close, get those removed, and let's check it again. Okay, definitely need to add a little bit more in there. Now we're at that 1/2 inch headspace. I always like to make sure too that I'm using a towel. I don't care if it gets stained, so I definitely do not use any type of white towel. I pretty much use this red towel for all of my canning with anything that's, you know, like cherries or blackberries or blueberries or mustard pickles that can stain tomato sauce. Wipe our rim clean, get our new canning lid, pop that on, put a band on, and we're gonna do this to fingertip tight. This jar is super hot, so I can't really hold on to it. So now we're gonna use our jar lifter to grasp this bad boy, and we're gonna get it over here and put it into the canner where the water is already hot. It's not quite at a boil, but it's close. Then we're gonna go ahead and get the rest of our jars filled up here. When you get to the bottom of the pan, I want to make sure that I've got enough solids and liquids to cover both of the bottom 2 jars. So I will oftentimes ladle them out kind of simultaneously like this, side by side. Whenever you are doing water bath canning, you want to make sure that the level of the water is at least 1 to 2 inches above the top of your jars. So I always check. And right here is to an inch mark. I'm just slightly over, so I'm good to go. This is just beginning to come to a full boil. It needs to be a little bit more. I've got a couple bubbles coming up. So we're gonna go ahead and put this lid on so that it can get to that hard boil before we start our processing time. With both water bath canning and pressure canning, you want to make sure that you're starting your processing time at the correct point. So with water bath canning, it's when it's actually at a full boil, we start our processing time. And with pressure canning, it's after it has vented and it's actually reached the pounds of pressure and that little weighted gauge is actually rocking and hissing back and forth. That's when you start your time. Sometimes new canners or inexperienced canners aren't sure when to start the time and they can get that wrong. So just a quick canning tip there. So I've got a small amount here left in the bottom of this pan. It's definitely not enough to do a pint or to worry canning about. And if you've got some left over and it will not fill a jar all the way to the correct headspace, you don't ever can anything unless you have enough to put it to the correct headspace and you're always following the headspace indicated by the recipe. Headspace is actually pretty important for it to exhaust the air out of there and that it reaches the correct temperature it needs to inside the jar as it's processing and it gets a good seal. So with this, I'm just gonna put it in a small jar and pop it into the fridge. So we are now at a full boil. You can see that's full on boil. So we're gonna set our timer for 10 minutes. So this is how much I had left over. So we got 4 pints and then you can see I had about, probably about 4 ounces left over. So as soon as this cools all the way to room temp, I'll pop a lid on here and just put it in the fridge for us to use immediately. And this stuff is amazing to add into your macaroni salad, your potato salads, as a hamburger spread, a sandwich spread, hot dog spread. Like, it's one of our favorite condiments. And when you go to make like a potato salad, it just makes it super quick because you've already got onions and you've already got cucumbers, or in this case zucchini, but they end up tasting just like a cucumber in there with the mustard. So all you have to do is add your cooked potatoes, your eggs, and some mayonnaise and this, and it just makes it super fast to whip up. And the flavor on this, you guys, is amazing. I had never tasted anything quite like it. When my husband and I first got married, and his dad learned that I love to can and I was a canner, he's like, you gotta get the recipe for Grandma's mustard pickles. And they weren't even sure who had the recipe because the grandmother that this recipe came from actually had passed away way before I had ever met my husband and we had gotten married. So I never got to meet her. But thankfully, one of his other grandmothers had asked her for the recipe years ago, and she found a copy and gave it to me. And so that's how I got this recipe. And I had never heard of mustard pickles before. I didn't even know what to expect, but I made them to give to him as a Christmas gift to my father-in-law because he had talked about them so fondly and it had been years since anybody in the family had made them. Well, after I made it once, I was hooked. And so this is something that I always make sure and put up at least a couple of batches every year from the garden, and we use it all year long. It's just one of our favorites. Okay guys, 10 minutes has elapsed, and then you always turn off the heat, remove the cover, let it cool for another 5 minutes so you don't get thermal shock and or siphoning. So thermal shock is when you take a super hot jar and you bring it into a colder environment. We don't want our glass to crack. That's why we put hot jars in hot water, and vice versa, taking them out. Siphoning doesn't happen so much. I don't have it really happen a lot with pickles, but I will have it with pie filling or some of those thicker things, or especially tomatoes. And that is where you followed the correct headspace. So the jar was completely full to where it should be. But then when you pull it out, you notice that there's a loss of liquid. That's what siphoning is. And this waiting that 5 minutes with the lid off and the heat turned off before you remove the jar, that can help reduce the siphoning that happens. If you enjoyed this video, make sure that you hit subscribe and the little bell so you get notified every time we release a new video, which is every Wednesday, and oftentimes some bonus ones there in between. If you want the printable version of this recipe, you can hop on over to my website. I'll have the link below in the video description so you can go and grab this recipe, and it has a printable form, so it'll print off in recipe form for you so you can make it. And I can't wait to hear, if you make it, what you think of this recipe. And you guys, if you are not already registered to get on the wait list, if you want to learn how to grow all of your own organic garden veggies and fruits so that you can use those in your preserving recipes, make sure that you are signed up for the organic gardening workshop. It's totally free and it all starts on October 2nd. You don't want to miss it. And if you signed up early, you got your seat reserved early, which it's all virtual, so it's all online. There's gonna be some special things that come to the people who are on that list that you are not gonna wanna miss out on. So you can go to organicgardeningworkshop.com. Okay, I will see you next week. I'm gonna get busy cleaning up the kitchen.